the other side of the break, Dr. Allen was talking to us about that critical race theory, and I want to hear more because it is just a theory, and I think that it hurts us to keep bringing things just to race because it distorts reality. What were you telling us?
Part of what I was trying to say is that if we respond to campaigns that have been predicated on race with reinforcing racial arguments, we're actually strengthening the campaign based on race to begin with. And that's a losing proposition. I know my friend Henry thinks that there's a good chance for the Republicans to take this race in Georgia. And I say to him, it looks more to me like Charlie Brown kicking the football. Mm-hmm. And they're going to meet the same campaign structure, the same appeals, and they don't have an answer to it. Mm-hmm. And so trying to frame that answer in racial terms is a big mistake as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I agree. And Henry, would you agree? Because when you think about just racism, socialism, is that going to win a national race that's so critical to all of us today?
I think that over the long term, the Republican Party needs to be able to explain what it means to be an American. Mm-hmm. It's not something that people are going to come up with in a 2-week time and stick it in a 30-second ad. Right. I do think that there's enough of a Republican base in Georgia that it is going to be a very tight race, and the people that both sides need, particularly Raphael Warnock, is he needs the votes of affluent white suburbanites who voted for Mitt Romney and voted for Joe Biden. And what the Loeffler campaign should be doing is saying, this is a man who calls your way of life white capitalist oppression, which he does. Okay. This is a man who thinks that the Bible is one of black liberation theology from you, the white capitalist. Mm-hmm. And the question is, how many people driving BMWs and going and getting their hair done and ferrying their kids about think of themselves as racist, capitalist oppressors. If you can make that point, and you can in a 30-second ad, then I think you can break through. But if they're not willing to do it or they don't do it inartfully, this will just be another coin flip election that depends on how you energize your already converted people to come out and cast your ballots.
Well, let's hope it doesn't amount to that, because this one is historic and critical for all of us, and to have to look at Georgia. And so my question, you talked about the specifics of what the campaign should be doing, and I pray they do, because I think you're absolutely right there, Henry. But Jonathan, other specifics are of concern too. If the Republicans don't pull this out, and we have Democrats in control of both of our houses in the Congress, and then we have control of the White House. If that is the reality, there are some specifics in culture, in taxing, in education that we need to address, I would think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You think of what Biden has put on the table as what he'll do in the first 100 days, something like the Equality Act, this radical reshifting of everything we know in terms of public interaction. And it sounds innocuous, right? The Equality Act. Everyone should be for equality. But what this bill actually does, and it's already passed this previous session in 2019, it places sexual orientation...
In the House.
In the House.
The Senate was the stopgate.
Exactly.
And now if the Senate goes Democrat, it can pass.
It'll be rubber
in the House and then in the... Yeah, go ahead.
Right, it'll be rubber stamped and pushed through, and Biden says he wants to do this. So he needs a Senate that allows for sexual orientation and gender identity to become part of civil rights law. And what that will do is take the full force of the federal government and using it as an agent to promulgate and to push LGBT agenda. And anything that stands in its way, whether it's the church, whether it's religious objection, whether it's moral conscience objection, whether it's even doctors who don't want to perform transgender surgeries, that will be steamrolled over as they put and implement, using the force of federal government, this Equality Act. That's just one of the many things that are at stake. But I think, as Joe Biden mentioned, that's one of his top priorities and something that the Senate needs to be a strong bulwark against.
Well, I hope the Christians are hearing you on that one. And that's not the only concern, Henry. We're thinking about his tax plans and what he has in store for not just, as they say, the wealthy, but this could hit the middle class and business community after we're just now trying to recover from COVID.
Well, definitely it'll hit the business community. Look, the one thing that they can pass on a majority vote is a tax bill. That's because of a thing called budget reconciliation. That's how Republicans have passed tax cuts and bypassed the filibuster. That's how they'll do their tax increases. Biden wants to increase taxes on individuals. He wants to repeal the corporate tax cuts, including on small business. And there's no way they can pay for their spending programs and do anything to keep the deficit marginally acceptably high as opposed to skyrocketing without beginning to tax the middle class and the upper middle class more. All those people who sit in those affluent Atlanta suburbs will see either their businesses socked with tax cuts themselves, tax hikes, themselves socked with tax hikes, or both if they give the Democrats control of the Senate.
Yikes. And other things too, Dr. Allen. It's like this is coming down to a whole lot of unraveling of what we've come to know as American culture. And when we talk about prosperity and what really brings value, economic value, moral value, but also when you just talk about a way of life for parents and their children, what is going to happen there when the federal government is controlled by people that have no interest in local, small, and unique government?
Yeah. But when you're thinking about the choices people have to make in their lives, the main point to underscore is they're going to have diminished opportunity to choose. They're going to have diminished opportunity to choose with regard to taxation and therefore economic performance, diminished opportunity to choose with regard to the civil rights questions that have been posed and discussed, and diminished opportunity to choose schooling for their children, to choose their educational outcomes. It is simply going to be a greater presence of the government in the lives of the people of this country, diminishing their choices across the board, because that's what the agenda is.
You know, we say this, and I've heard this from conservatives, and we hear about it on a regular basis in the news to some extent, but yet half the country still voted for this left-wing agenda. They voted for it. It's no need of us pretending that it's some other matter, unless it is some other matter. What happened? Why is it that although we're understanding some of the destruction that will take place from this Equality Act, from what they'll do in taxes, from what they'll do in all of the programming that they have, including with education and more limited choices, do people just not care? What should we be thinking about and doing in our local communities to make them care if they don't?
Well, certainly people have to continue to express the kinds of sentiments that you saw actually visible in this election. Look down ballot and you don't see people voting for this progressive agenda. What you see is people constrained in a political environment where the effect of their participation didn't really reflect their opinions. There's a division between the outcome of the election and the opinions of the voters. Apart from the manufactured votes, in which I still believe, basic citizens to a huge degree reflected a steadiness and a conservatism that is still important.
Do you agree with that, Henry?
Well, it depends on what we mean by conservatism. You know, look, the United States has wanted a large government since at least the election of 1932. They want to have government involved in a way to remove some of the risks and moderate some of the downsides of the pre-New Deal world. And that's not going to go away. But what they don't want is a government that calls all the shots, that tells them what to do with their lives, and constrains them into being simple cogs in a machine. And they're continually faced in their minds with a choice between one side that wants to make them cogs in the machine and another side that doesn't understand that they want to have some degree of stability that government can provide. And once a conservatism responds to that and actually says there is a role in a conservative government for providing affirmative health for people who genuinely need it. It's not all on your own. It's not pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
I see that I've not heard that from conservatives that it's all or nothing. I hear a lot from libertarians, but we're talking about conservatives who pass things like faith-based initiatives and continue to support Social Security and Medicare. So I don't take it that far that is an extreme of conservative, but it is of libertarian. We do know that they want as small a government as possible. But my question then would be, based on what Henry said, Jonathan, are people willing to take less government, and even if it means not having a whole lot of the benefit that they think that they're getting, or are they going to buy this idea that because we want benefits since the 30s, we're going to allow government to get into areas of our lives to undermine the very values that we say we believe.
Right, and I think that's a difficulty of the exchange, the social contract that was sort of the basis for any established nation, but really the basis of our country. I think that contract is very one-sided now, and it's leaning towards government, where government has spread their tentacles into areas of life that they should never be involved in. And of course, we do have to harp back on the moral implications of what's going on. You have, even in this Equality Act that we mentioned, you have a carve-out for discrimination against pregnancy, and they throw that word in sort of innocuously. You don't really know what it means, but it effectively means that the federal government now cannot disallow an individual from getting an abortion from the legislative side. Of course, we already have that in the federal courts through Roe v. Wade, but now the legislature is codifying this, which means tax dollars follow it. And that's the same application.
So we're all going to be paying for abortion.
Exactly, and that's in the language. You wouldn't pay attention to it if it's not called out to you. And there's so many different areas, almost 120 statutes within the federal agencies, of which there are far too many federal agencies.
Well, and that's what I think has happened. We'll get into Henry's point that people want some government role in helping others, which, we can debate another time how aggressive that should be, especially from a federal standpoint. I think that the feds should leave it to the states and local communities. But the devil in the details is a true statement, Dr. Allen. There's a lot of devil in a lot of these details, and I don't know that people are paying close enough attention to know how it's going to impact their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I think that's true. The devil is in the details. I think what Henry was suggesting before is a true fact. People want smart government. What we need to understand, however, is that smart government is government that enables people to take care of themselves and doesn't displace people in taking care of themselves.
So the American people don't understand this, or is it politicians?
The politicians certainly don't, because they're constantly trying to take over the tasks that people should be performing for themselves. Smart government enables people to look after themselves. That's what smart government does. That's what people want, conservative, center, and even somewhat to the left.
Henry, is that what you were saying? Because, and I'm not sure, because I think Americans want more than smart government. They do want security from government. They want to make sure that if something happens to me, Uncle Sam's there.
Well, but the sort of things they want is sort of things that allow them to exert some control over their circumstances.
Precisely.
Which includes things like subsidies with public education, because most people couldn't afford to send all of their children to a decent quality school without some degree of taxation, whether it's called a public school or whether it's a school voucher. But within that thing that government does provide, they want to be able to direct themselves and take care of themselves. And that's the balance that I think would be better met by a vocal, aggressive conservatism that recognizes that, rather than one that is always pushing in a way that runs against the grain of American sentiment for the last 90 years.
That's interesting, because there again, at the conservative, I've been in this town since welfare reform, and I just feel that the difference is not that they don't acknowledge this, that they just don't want it done from Washington. Am I missing something?
I think you're right. Local control has always been the bedrock of American society. One thing that has been diluted, especially in the Georgia race, with it being nationalized, and everything leading up to even the general election, is that the issues weren't really being discussed. We weren't drilling down to anything, honestly, past coronavirus, and maybe healthcare was on the ballot. Folks understood how, in a world of a pandemic, how government healthcare may have some influence. Certainly, there was some talk about education, but it wasn't widespread. The issues that face Americans, Dr. Allen said, on a day-to-day basis weren't being discussed. Both parties.
Whose role is it? That's where I am going to give to Henry, because I think that where conservatives may have missed a little bit is that whose role is it? Not that they don't care about these issues and we're not talking about them. I think that we're talking at each other when it comes to it. Democrats want it done from Washington, and conservatives have not made the case that these things should not be done from Washington. A nanny state is not a good idea for the future of the country. That's where I think about it, Dr. Allen.
It seems reasonable, but remember this. States' rights were once the defense of local reservation, local preserves, local authority, in defense of what was indefensible.
That's right. That's right.
And so we now see state rights on the other side.
I know, and that's
depending
something
the progressive
goes around.
agenda.
I think that's God. God just makes us keep going around until we get it right. So